In previous videos, we've talked about the nature of power and how it moves. But this does beg the question, is there such a thing as too much power? If power is defined as your ability to control your circumstances, then surely not. Surely the more power you have, the more control you can exert and the better you can bring about whatever goals you set for it, right? How is it that powerful groups and powerful individuals can fail? Surely if you have a huge concentration of power, it makes you less likely to fail. But then how is it that organizations such as Boeing can make such fundamental design flaws that 2 of their aircraft crash? Or billionaires such as Elizabeth Holmes can end up destitute despite having started with enough money to last several lifetimes? My research indicates that power concentrations can be very, very dangerous. Not because of the nature of the individuals that hold that power, but because of the nature of power itself, which means that everyone that holds power is at risk. There are 3 perils of power. The first of these is that power tends to preclude criticism. This can happen actively, in that I don't like what this person is saying to me, even if they're right, and I'm going to get rid of them. Either fire them or, more realistically, just give them less opportunities to give me that feedback. Just discourage it. Now, this is pretty blatantly a bad idea, and therefore it's the less dangerous one. By far the more dangerous version of this is where it happens accidentally. One common example of this I'm always hearing about through my work is the open door policy. My door is always open, says the manager. You can come in at any time and tell me anything you need to tell me. I will always be receptive. Always be honest with me. I appreciate it. Now, how often does that actually work? Constant source of frustration for managers in that they offer this policy to their staff and the staff just don't take them up on it. They have to find out about problems on the factory floor 5 or 6 degrees separated and after the problem is already manifested. So why don't staff use this mechanism? Well, think about it from their perspective, through the perspective of power. From the manager's perspective, this is a genuine offer. It's well intended. But from the staff's perspective, what would happen if they came into the office and told you something that you really didn't like? You might listen, or you might fire them, or make their life very, very difficult. Now you won't, obviously. From the manager's perspective, that's not what you're trying to do. You're trying to encourage this feedback so you can make better decisions. But you can, and the staff know it. As a result, unintentionally, this concentration of power you have over your staff precludes criticism. They are less likely to approach you with critical information that they think that you won't like. And this leads us to the second peril of power, that it encourages cognitive biases. Cognitive biases are not a lack of information. You don't make mistakes because of a lack of information using a cognitive bias, but rather because you misinterpreted that information and came to a false conclusion. There are 188 known cognitive biases that are active in people's minds at all times. They're impossible to eliminate, but they can be managed for. Unfortunately for the powerful, one of the main ways of managing them is by surrounding yourself with different perspectives and critical feedback. This is where policies such as diversity and inclusion are so valuable. However, when you have that power concentration and subsequently accidentally preclude criticism from your environment and are less and less likely to get that sort of negative feedback, cognitive biases just flourish. It's a perfect environment for them. And the worst part is that you won't notice it happening because they're cognitive biases. You can't really be aware of your own biases unless you're challenged on them or are very actively managing for them. As a result, you will start to make incorrect decisions without even knowing that you're doing it, and no one will be able to challenge you. And that leads us to the third peril of power, which is that no one thinks they're the bad guy. No one goes home, no matter how bad their conduct, no one goes home at the end of the day and goes, gee, I love being a bad person. People want to feel like they're good people. People don't like to feel like they're making mistakes or doing the wrong thing. But sometimes they do, and as a result we get into rationalization. Now everyone does this to some degree or another. The problem is that when you introduce power into the mix, all of the ways of diffusing such a delusion are reduced. You have less critical feedback around you, both actively and passively, and your cognitive biases are allowed to flourish, which makes the reinforcement of that delusion so much easier because there is increasingly less people around you who can challenge it. And increasingly, your peers have similar problems. They're also affected by this imbalance of power. And so if you have a meeting of CEOs, they're all similarly affected by these perils of power. Similarly, the people that are likely to provide you with that criticism can't get to that meeting because they're not invited. What this is illustrating is how essential it is to ensure that you get a flow of critical information into your decision making, because this is the only way we ever improve. Disagreement, negative feedback, refinement of our position over time. Unfortunately, unless they are managed for, those three perils of power are going to reduce your ability to do this, which is exactly why we see such well-established and professional organizations such as Boeing end up making such catastrophic decisions. A perfect example of this comes from the CommInsure scandal of 2016. CommInsure is the insurance arm of the Commonwealth Bank, one of the big four banks in Australia. And during 2016, their chief medical officer, Benjamin Coe, went to the media and alerted the public to the fact that CommInsure was redefining what qualified as a medical condition in order to not have to pay out claims. In particular, perhaps the worst example was that they redefined organ failure as a non-claimable condition because one can simply get an organ transplant. This led to some fairly severe impacts on affected clients, and as a result, after attempting internal improvement, Dr. Coe went to the media and whistle blew. Now, this raises two very distinct questions. One, how does such terrible unethical behavior become acceptable and the norm inside the organization? And two, why didn't Dr. Coe deal with this internally? Why did he go to the media? The first question, well, can it be challenged? Someone is sitting in the boardroom and the decision is made to redefine medical conditions to make them non-claimable, a blatantly unethical move. Is there anyone in this room who is willing to challenge that decision? What will happen to them if they do? Will you even be allowed into the decision-making table if you are the sort of person that would challenge the prevailing notion in the room? Who would challenge the profitability of the decision because it's unethical? If not, and if there is not a means of getting that criticism on the table, then it's not very surprising that such a decision is made. All you have to do to rationalize it to yourself is ignore the impact it'll have on others. The second question, why did Dr. Benjamin Coe go to the media and not use the proper internal mechanism? CommInsure actually has a very well-established whistleblowing mechanism internally. It's quite well fleshed out as these things go. Why didn't he use it? Who runs it? The same people he would be reporting against. Much as with the open door policy, it may have been very well intended. It may have been, please let us know internally, please use this mechanism and we will attempt to reform internally rather than taking it public and damaging the industry. But the same people that he would be reporting against were the same ones that were running it. He did not trust this policy and therefore he sought alternative options. Now, in case you're sitting there thinking, well, you know, I mean, it's obviously unethical, but at the same time, it made a lot of money for the company, right? Did it? Consider the implications of this. This scandal not only lost CommInsure quite a number of customers, because why would you get insurance from a company that might try and pull the rug out from under you once you try and make a claim? It also damaged the reputation of Commonwealth Bank as a whole and the banking industry as a whole. This was one of the precursor events to the Royal Commission into the banking industry, which concluded in 2019, which has in turn massively damaged trust in that institution, which in turn makes it vastly more likely to be subject to regulation in the future and is already subject to quite a lot more scrutiny. Whatever you want to achieve as a professional or as a business, whatever that objective is, you want to make decisions that will successfully achieve it. This requires accurate decision making, and this is where our ethics fall in. Power has the danger of corrupting that process, and unless those risks are managed for, unless the dangers, the three perils of a power imbalance are managed for, you stand a very high chance of making that error. And you've got to bear in mind that honesty is a privilege of the secure.